All right, so let's go over baking real quick. So there's a lot of guys are doing it wrong, and so we're gonna settle some things here. First up, Shift D, duplicate that, right click, and you'll go to the center. I'm gonna make a low, okay, and I'm gonna make a high. So the low right now, check the eyeball, so I'm only working on the low. Is UV mapped already by default. It should work out just fine. Shouldn't be any big problem. Go to the UV editor. You don't want it running to the border necessarily. Back it off a little bit. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the UV map side of things, but let's hide that. Let's go to the high poly. So a lot of you guys will come into the high poly and just make it whatever you want it to be, right? You're like, yeah, bevel that like this real quick. We'll inset it. Maybe we'll inset it again and press Control and push it down. And so the reason why your bakes always end up becoming problematic is probably because you just don't understand how they actually work. And it's not your fault. It's actually because Blender bakes differently than, say, like Maya or 3D Studio Max. So we shade this smooth, and this is what we get, right? Looks good. We want this, for the most part, on the other model, except we might want to do something like auto smooth probably won't help us much here, but maybe it does. It does a little bit. We want it to be like super smooth, so we don't really use that. We use like a weighted normal modifier. And this is probably what a lot of you guys try anyway, so we'll go with that. And you want this on that low poly, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the shading tab real quick. We'll just do this in Blender for now. So we're going to bake here in Blender. But more or less, we just need to create a texture, image texture, create new, boom, done. Okay, so that's there. We can call it bake or whatever we want. And we're going to change it from sRGB to non-color. Okay, go back to the render settings here, switch over to cycles, go down to the bake tab, regular one, switch it to normal. I'm going to leave all that alone. We're going to selected to active, right? We're not using a cage. And so we're going to do this to this. So control click on the active element at the end, and you'll be able to switch it to the highlighted one, right? So the low. Make sure this is selected. Okay, and now we should be able to click bake. Bam. No valid selected objects. Oh, I gotta turn that back on. My bad. And also, you might want to adjust the max ray distance here. This one usually is the one that messes you up. Let's turn it up a little bit. Valid selected objects. Okay, why would that be? That looks valid. That looks valid. Let's try it again. Okay, it worked that time. So yeah, click and then click. Make sure this is highlighted. It's going to take just a second. You'll see it pop up over here. I don't really like this one being down here. I have it up here. I'd rather have this be bigger that way. So we can see our normal now. So just right click there and you can do that. You'll see we got some artifacts. More than likely, that was the max ray distance. It still probably wasn't enough for whatever reason, but there you have it. And the default cube, when it bakes, not sure why we still have artifacts. Set the 1 meter. Set it just a little bit higher. It shouldn't really need to go that high. The Blender Baker is not really good at all, um, in my opinion. So get Substance Painter or get Marmoset Tool Bag. Marmoset Tool Bag has the best baker. So we can see that actually worked a little better. I just put it too high. And this is what we get. It's already set to non-color. You have to do that before you bake because it grays out afterward for some reason. Which is just another lovely feature of Blender. But we apply this to the low real quick. So we're going to do a Shift A, create vector, normal map, bam, normal color, right? We'll switch over to, oh, it's already on shading preview. Okay. So in shading preview, You can see it right now. Let's change the roughness down and turn metallic up. You'll see it clearer. Exactly what's going on. And it's garbage, right? Like this is rough. This is not what you want. Um, and that's gonna happen every time. I guarantee it. So the thing here is you don't understand how this model is actually being shaded. And so let's jump into edit mode. In edit mode, we're going to go down to this little thing here under this drop down, right? This is only available in edit mode, just by the way. So a default cube that's flat shaded looks something like this. It has a split vertex normal, okay? If you were to go back to object mode, shade it smooth, and go back in edit mode, get a single vertex normal. This will actually bake correctly. Matter of fact, let's go back to the shading tab here. Select this. We'll do the whole shebang again, right? Um, let's just bake it and we'll see how it comes out. It'll take just a second, but you get the idea, right? So now it bakes. Let's hide the high, rehook it up, take a look at it. You can see what's going on. Well, now we got a problem. This doesn't look bad if you're not using metallic. I don't know why I'm going over there. If you're not using metallic, right? It doesn't look too bad like this, but it does have a problem, and that is that it's creating gradients. Okay, this isn't what you want in normal maps because if you were to adjust your normal map strength, it blows it out. Like it really messes it up. So this isn't technically correct. You can do it if you're in a pinch or a bind on non-reflective surfaces, but it's not really advisable. And it's not very professional. Don't put that in your portfolio. So instead, let's do this. We're going to deconnect it again, right? Disconnect it again. And so you'd be tempted to say, oh, I'll just auto smooth it then. And we're back to this. Well, when you go into edit mode, this is the same as flat shading, basically. So when you auto smooth something, or let's say you take two edges here and mark it sharp, um, this may or may not work without auto smooth. Okay, it works with auto smooth, but marking sharp like so, it does, you can see it's already splitting the vertex normals up, right? So if you'd ever seen these guys before, now you're introduced to them. If you hit Alt-N, when you did flips, recalculate outsides, insides, all that fun stuff, you actually have a lot of options in here to adjust your shading. And so one of these happens to be rotate. You'll use this later on for doing like vegetation and stuff, believe it or not. But for right now, I just want to prove a point that you can actually rotate these things and edit them. And so that's that. Now under the geometry data tab, when you rotate and start customizing these normals, it creates custom normal data. You got to clear that right here sometimes. Otherwise, you can't use auto smooth and all that fun stuff. So, okay. Now, auto smooth is really good for working in Blender. And when you're just trying to do general renders, it's not that bad. If you're doing a low poly game object that uses like trim sheets or something like that, or seamless textures, you might use that and be just fine with it. It won't be no big deal. However, when you use the split normal data, it actually does add up if you have a lot of split normal data, right? In the file itself, it'll start to add up. So let me kind of show you this real quick. If I export this object as an OBJ file, just want you to see what's going on here. Can't export it as wavefront OBJ. Let's go to the desktop. No special settings there at all. Just doing that. Now, the OBJ file's on my desktop. Just right click on it and open it with the notepad. And this is what you'll see. So this is what 3D models look like basically in raw form. It's really, really quite simple. You have like vertex data, you have vertex normal data, and you have UV stuff and faces, whatever. All right. But when you start using split vertices, you'll start getting a bunch of like extra data kind of piling up. And so on big, heavy models, that can really slow down at a game environment or whatever the case may be if there's a lot of it. So anyways, with that out of the way, what do you do here in Blender to get past this? Now in Max, you might be tempted, or like Maya, you might be tempted to use smooth groups. We don't have smooth groups here. We really don't. So the thing is you need to actually use more polygons to hold the shading, okay? And so check this out. That means you are going to end up having to bevel a corner. And you want to make sure it's something like this. Okay, we're going to turn these guys off. They're irrelevant right now. Okay. So something like this so you can place seams where you need them appropriately. We're going to clear those sharps as well. And so what we want to do is on auto smooth, we're going to use it, but we're going to max it out to 180. We're not going to touch it again, okay? That's what you want to do. You want to use a weighted normal modifier. This is going to alter this cube just a tiny bit when it comes to those normals, okay? So when we do the weighted normal, blam, there you go. You see how it tightened up a little bit? All right, you're going to want to do that, and you may also want to use face influence. This is optional, but what this is going to allow you to do is when you select faces, hit Alt-N, you can set face strengths as well. So you can tweak this a little bit further by doing this manually with these. Now, if you set everything to 1, it's going to behave just like it is right now for the most part. But in certain situations, you might want, say, like these ones to be stronger. So you can actually do that, and it's not going to have much of an influence on this model, but you get the idea of that. It will allow you to tweak those things around a little bit. So something to play around with and check out. Fortunately, not a good example, but let's move on from that. Let's go ahead and let's create a copy of this real quick. We'll have one without, one with, so we'll need 2 copies actually, because we're going to keep that one. But this is without, let's convert it to a mesh. This is with, let's convert it to a mesh. Take a look at both of them, and we'll see what's going on here with the vertex normals. So let's turn that back on. Okay. So when we look at these side by side, what you'll see is that these ones kind of arch out this way a little bit, while these ones go up and down more, or left and right. Okay. And so that's all that's doing is just tweak that little slight difference in the direction there, tweaks the lighting on these pretty substantially. So you can see like this is a lot cleaner than this one. All right, so that's going to give you a better normal map. That's all I'm trying to point out here. All right. Now, so unfortunately, if you're trying to make mobile assets using normal maps and you're trying to get like that single-sided edge all the way around, the only trick to really do that is you're going to have to suffer through baking it with the sharp edges. And then you're going to have to pretty much on your UV map, you're going to end up doing this number where you select it and just do like an Alt S and just scale everything up or down a little bit with Alt S and hope it works out. You can't get it perfect, unfortunately. But anyways, so this is what you want. It's self-contained, like the model itself shades properly by itself. It doesn't necessarily have to be extreme high poly or nothing crazy. It just needs to be able to shade by itself, right? And so now this thing here probably isn't going to match that one over there because I beveled it, but if you see, yeah, they're like intersecting each other, so that's probably not a good idea to use this one anymore. All right, let's do this instead. Let's delete this high. We're going to use it. Oh, that was low. Let's delete this high. I'm going to have the low here. Okay. And the low, instead of beveling this manually like we did, I'm going to press M, merge by distance, and just bump this up so it all collapses real quick. Okay, something like that. Okay, instead of letting this happen, doing this manually off the bat, what we want to do is I'm going to duplicate it first of all. Actually, wait a second. We're going to add a bevel modifier to this real quick. And this bevel modifier, we want it above the weighted normal. Weighted normal goes last. You can adjust it and give it the proper amount. There we go. We can duplicate this. Okay. So we have our low poly. Now we're going to end up with our high poly, which we're going to use this same setup here. Whoop, don't adjust that. We're going to add segments to it. Okay. And we can make all the other needed adjustments that we want. We can use box cutter, we can use bool tools, whatever the case may be, to modify this high poly mesh. The only thing we want to do, that's kind of weird how it broke down like that, but it did. Okay. And so the only thing we really want to do though is make sure that by the end of this model, the low poly matches the way we want it to. So it's going to take a little bit of trial and error to get there, but you will get there at some point, those kinds of things. So if I do like say a bool tools, boolean, I can do things like that, whatever, right? Model until your heart's content. I'm gonna turn those back off because they're distracting. But all right, let's say we got that going on. and do non-destructive modeling all day, basically. So like box cutter and knocking something here. So trying to cut the objects. Trying to cut here. There we go. All right. So there's some box cutter going on. Now that's a pretty big shape there, so it's probably better not to do that. It is probably better to kind of pull that out a little bit. Something like that. Hear it. Oh, okay. I guess that messed it up. Let's grab that again and just kind of. Why is it doing all? What's going on? There we go. I had set my orientation different. But, all right. So we got this going on. This could be shaded smooth or whatever. It doesn't matter. You can leave these sharp if you wanted to, technically. But all right, let's collapse this down. So blam. So at the last possible moment, you'll probably collapse this down to bake it because sometimes the booleans don't sit right with the weighted normal on it. So, or the bevels and stuff like that. So you might have to do like some cleanup, things like that. But that weighted normal and everything, it'll probably get converted to a mesh. Last thing you want to do is apply a weighted normal. Okay. Now, if you're going to Substance Painter, you'll also triangulate it. Okay, just keep that in mind. And you'll probably have to check keep normals. Okay, okay, so we got a high poly now. Cool. But the low poly, what about it? Okay, same deal basically. You would clean it up the best you can. You probably turn it destructive because you can't go in here and really UV map this correctly with a bevel modifier. So apply that, Control A, grab all these edges, or you could do U, Smart UV Project in this case. This is a little trick for you. It's going to do something like this by default, just kind of split everything up, which is cool. But if you select all that, you can do UV seams from islands. Okay, so select it all and seams from islands there. Usually it gets it right on this shape. When you do a more complex shape, it won't always do that. You have to go around and refix the seams, basically. If your object's symmetrical, you can just mirror it over. In this case, it's actually not symmetrical, but you get the idea. Okay, so because we've done that, we can always just press U and unwrap. Another tip for you, Blender has two unwrap methods, angle-based, which is good for organics, and conformal, which is better for hard surfaces. Okay, you can also adjust the margin amounts here, kind of space them up. Cool. Just keep that in mind. Now, let's go ahead and jump into shading again. I'm going to turn the high poly back on, select it, low poly. I don't guarantee this is going to work out very well, but we're about to find out. So, also, if you're doing Unreal Engine stuff, the green channel, you're going to swap it, I think, to negative Y. I think Blender's backwards. Positive Y? I don't remember exactly, but basically, positive Y, negative Y, one or the other is going to be DirectX, and the other one's going to be OpenGL. So by default, I think it's OpenGL with positive Y. So I'll bake in here really, so it's annoying. But we're going to bake this out. See, we got this going on. Okay, and one of the many downsides of Blender is that it does, in fact, not do very well with baking usually. So let's try this again with more max ray distance. So it has to shoot in two directions. It's not really a good setup. That's a lot of information it's trying to take in, or like a lot of depth to that. Generally speaking, you don't want to do big shape changes like this. Okay, in this case, we'll probably get away with it. Like you can see, it doesn't look too bad right now. I don't know what's going on with it exactly, but it looks okayish. So let's plug it in. Let's see what happens. Normal. And we'll turn off the high and we'll look at this. And you can see we actually have it transferred over now. It's not very pretty. Blender has a problem with faceting. Okay, when it comes to, or like aliasing, when it comes to the texture, you can see it's not that great. All right, but it did in fact bake mostly correctly, and we don't have gigantic seams everywhere. Now, it does have another little curious oddity, which is sometimes it has this little stretch right here. I haven't found a real good way to get rid of those, um, generally speaking, other than having more polygons, but even then, sometimes it doesn't seem to disappear all that well. So fortunately, when you throw textures on this, that's that's almost not noticeable at all. But so what we can do though is we're going to do, we have to unselect this every time, otherwise we get a circular dependency and it bakes the normal map into the normal map, and it's weird. Something like that anyways. So what we're going to be doing instead this time is we're going to bake again, but this image here, we're going to resize it real quick. Size it up. Resize, it's 1024. Let's do a 2048. The downside of baking in Blender is that um, when you do this, because of that aliasing on the edges, you need to do it twice the size at least, preferably more, and you're going to downsize it later on to the texture size you want to use. So if you're making a 2K texture, you got to bake at 4K. If you want a 4K texture, you need to bake at 8K, et cetera, right? So that gets pretty costly. Anyway, so we select this. We got those selected just like so. We can go ahead and do a long bake now. It's going to take substantially longer. Well, maybe not substantially, but it takes a good bit longer. And because of that, Blender baking is just kind of, it's slow. Okay, let's just be honest, it's slow. And how long it takes to do this, I could probably bake all of that at 2K in Substance Painter with ambient occlusion and everything else um, just as fast, more or less. So anyways, once this is done baking, we're going to resample this down in size. I just want to show you how that can be done. Okay, so we're going to do image size, or resize. And hey, just like we changed it before. Now you just downsample it, 1024. Okay, when we do that, you'll see that everything gets a dithering effect on the edges. Okay, it's like an anti-aliasing effect, basically. And so now when we plug that in to the normal, what's going to happen here is that this should look a little bit smoother, a bit nicer. Okay, so we have in fact now successfully baked. This works pretty much the same way in Substance, all right? Unfortunately, you just can't get away with like super cheap low poly models um, like you thought you probably could, unfortunately. But this image is not saved, by the way, inside of Blender. So you do want to, if you ever see this little image star thing here, little star next to image, it means you got to save it somewhere. So save it to the desktop. That's cool. Preferably save it as a 16-bit. Normal maps like 16-bit usually. Compression with PNG doesn't matter. It's actually lossless, so you can use that. PNG file works fine. Use other formats if you want, and save it. And then you can always load it back up whenever you need it. All that fun stuff, right? And so pretty much that's it for this one. If we take a look at this though, let's just check it with metallic on, roughness down, material pre. Got it. You can see, yeah, it's a pretty wacky model, but other than that one little section in the middle, which drives me nuts, it's not too bad. Could probably get rid of that as well. See everything's separated a little bit. You probably could. Seems like Blender's always got this issue, but it's not Blender. This isn't just Blender that does this. It's every software, I think, but it's something to do with the U something. I don't know. Alt S and just like you see how like I'm bumping it in just a tiny bit, like a pixel. Sometimes you can clear things like that up by doing that. In this case, I think it's up a little. Yeah. Almost got it. I think that's as good as it's going to get though. It's the most precise. But sometimes you can do that if you have something mapped badly. I don't recommend doing it though. I recommend fixing the issue, but I think this is just now Blender, as good as it is, it just has some weird fundamental bugs to it that need to be addressed. I think that's one of them. There's also a little thing in the UV maps where textures become distorted, at any, it happens at all resolution, but it just seems to clear up more as you add more faces. So like subdivision mesh doesn't have as many little texture distortions as say like a low poly mesh would because it's less faces. So each face gets a little distortion to it. That's because of the triangulation. So at the end of the day, all models are triangulated in game engines and all that fun stuff. So if you select all these faces and you right click and do triangulate faces or Control T, this is the actual model that would end up being displayed or rendered or whatever the case may be. And so um, in Max, you can at least, when you're working on your mesh, you can change the triangulation of the model by clicking a little tool, and those triangles will pop up. You can flip them around and stuff. Fortunately, here in Blender, you don't get that option, so you actually have to do joins or cuts to control your triangulation. So you'll have to do that number or use the knife tool, so K, and then cut from one side to the other side and do something like that. Also, the Machine Tools add-on has this awesome feature where you can just spin edges. So if you do have something that's completely triangulated, or maybe you're doing some sub-D stuff or just regular modeling, just wanted to mention this because I think it's awesome, but not Mark Sharp. Mark Seam. Nope, I'm sorry, Mark Seam. What am I doing? I want to turn this into triangles. Triangulate faces. There you go. There we go. It's hidden. Lost. But yeah, so we can just spin these things. You can see how much that influences the reflections and the surfaces and the shading and stuff too, right? That's partially I think, problem with the code in Blender at like a fundamental level. I mean, it does it in all 3D software, but Blender seems a little bit worse than others. So sometimes it seems worse. I'm sure Max and Maya have plenty of problems. I just haven't used them in forever. So, anyways, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Hopefully, you have a little bit of a better time doing some baking now. And see you in the next video. All right, take care.